Hello, everybody. My name is Michaela Antelek, and this week we were encouraged to talk about a special population. So today we are going to be talking about providing mental health services to the disabled. So ground rules before we get started. Number one, confidentiality and privacy. So everything that is said in this group stays in the group. And I also would like to let you guys know that I am a mandated reporter. So if there is anybody that expresses wanting to harm themselves or others, that is something that I would have to report. Number two, respectful communication and active listening. We really want to make sure that we are listening to one another and we're actively listening to one another and we're not being disruptive. Number three, participation. So as a group, it's very beneficial that we all participate. Of course, I'm not going to make anybody speak if they don't want to. I want to make sure first and foremost that everybody's comfortable. But I do highly encourage participation. And number four, are there any other ground rules that you guys feel that we should have in this group? Okay, moving on. So before we get into things, I just want to give you guys a brief introduction to our special population. So today we're going to be talking about individuals with disabilities, and I gave you guys this little chart just to give you an idea of what different types of disabilities are, because there's many different kinds. Just to give you a brief overview, there are behavioral, sensory, and physical disabilities. So an example of a disability might be social anxiety, and it says right on the bottom how this might impact somebody. So for someone with social anxiety, this might impact their ability to maintain relationships. I will send you guys a copy of this presentation if you guys ever want to reference back to these charts. I know there's a couple of other things later on in the group that I will be discussing that you guys might want to refer back to. So our agenda for today, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go over some statistics. This is just going to give you guys an idea of like the prevalence of disabilities in our nation and how much of a need there is in our communities for mental health services for individuals with disabilities. Secondly, we're going to go over barriers to treatment. So we're just going to discuss some of the different barriers that these people experience when they're trying to receive mental health services. Thirdly, we're going to be talking about how to accommodate these individuals. So how can we make sure that these individuals are being served in the best way that we can do for them. And number four, we're going to talk about the importance of nonverbal communication when treating this population. So before we get started, I just want to do an icebreaker activity. So I am going to stop sharing my screen briefly. We're going to be doing self-care charades. So what I want you guys to do is I want you guys to act out with your hands one thing that you guys did this week so far, good for yourself. So I can go first. And can you guys see me okay? And you guys can just shout out and guess. I can keep doing
Go
it.
on a mental health walk.
Yes, I went for a walk this week. It's something that I did nice for myself. Who wants to go next?
I'll go next.
You took a
That's
nap.
it. Yeah. Yeah.
Naps are important.
They really are. We need to recharge.
I'll go.
Deep breathing.
Yeah.
Awesome. Does anybody else want to go?
So for mine, I have to use a prop because like the hand motion that I can think of, honestly, I don't know if you guys get it.
Is it knitting? Crocheting.
Crocheting, but yeah.
Good job, guys.
Fun.
Screen back up. Okay. So this week, again, our professor had asked us to observe verbal and nonverbal communication behaviors. So during our group today, I want you guys to kind of take note of the different nonverbal and verbal communication behaviors that you see, because we are going to be talking about these later on in our group. So I provided the definitions for you guys. Verbal communication, these are the words and sounds that come out of our mouths, including tone of voice, size, and groans. And nonverbal communication, these are the signs and messages we communicate using our body language, gestures, and facial expressions. So statistics. So every 1 in 4 individuals living in the United States has a disability. So this accounts for 26% of our population. I'm not going to read all of the statistics to you guys. And that's another reason why I'm going to send you guys this presentation so that you guys can go back and look at these if you were interested. But I am going to read the first one because I think it's very important for us to recognize when we're talking about mental health services for this population. So 13.9% of US adults have a cognitive disability with serious difficulty concentrating, remembering, or making decisions. This really highlights the need for mental health services for this population. It's very, very essential that we have accessible services for people with disabilities. So what barriers might the disabled population experience? What do you guys think for barriers?
Well, our society is very ableist, and so I'm often thinking that when I'm walking around in the city, just like the distance that somebody would have to go just to get to an elevator at a train station or to an appropriate stop for them, is really problematic. It's a big barrier.
Yeah, for sure. Does anybody else have any ideas on barriers?
Another
also
thing is at the doctors, there's not always interpreters available if they're, hard of hearing or deaf.
That's a huge one that we're going to be talking about a little bit, the lack of ASL interpreters and, the expectation that they bring their own interpreter or they have somebody with them that can translate. That's a huge one. Are there any others?
I was just going to say that the ability to access services is often it requires having somebody who doesn't have the disability that they're working with, that they're dealing with, to actually access the services, and that's really a barrier as well.
Yeah. Do we have any others?
I would say communication barriers in terms of because I went to McDonald's the other day and I seen that they were advertising a Braille menu. I thought that was so inclusive. I love that because how do they how can they read the menu if there's no resources provided for them, such as Braille menus and things of that nature.
Yeah, that's actually something that I was watching for this past week when I was putting this presentation together, is the lack of Braille and other like resources like out in our public facilities, that it's just so lacking in some of our communities. It's definitely appalling once you actually pay attention to those things. Good job, guys. So I do have a couple of those on the next slide. The first one I had was poverty and affordability of services. So 25% of the disabled population lives in poverty. And there's also a huge lack of adequate insurance coverage because 53% of disabled individuals have public health insurance. So insurances like Medicaid and Fidelis and all of that. A lot of times there's limitations or things might not be covered at all. A lot of insurances have, for example, on therapy sessions, like an insurance company might only cover like your first 10 sessions and then you're expected to pay for continuation of services. Challenges in communication and transportation. So we spoke briefly about the lack of ASL translators and even someone who might have a cognitive disability that maybe has like some speech issues. That's huge for trying to understand like their needs. And transportation as well for a lot of the individuals that live in more rural communities, just getting to the services is a big barrier. The lack of knowledgeable providers. So many mental health providers are not adequately trained to provide services to disabled individuals, and they may not know how to adapt care to meet the special needs of these individuals. And then lastly, discrimination. We see this a lot in the community. There's a stigma against these individuals, and a lot of times that serves as a barrier when we're trying to provide services to them. So, as future social workers, how would you seek to accommodate an individual who is disabled?
I have one for language barriers. At my job, and I'm pretty sure at many of our jobs, we have a phone service that you can call up and you can let them know what language you're seeking, and then they'll be the translator for the session. So I thought that it's definitely helpful when you're encountering language barriers.
Yeah, that's huge. I wish my agency had that because, reflecting back on a lot of these things, the agency that I work at right now, it's a nonprofit and we do not have a lot of accommodations for communication barriers. Is there anything else you guys can think of for accommodating these people?
I think offering both in-person and virtual services can be really nice, and having that flexibility, because that way if somebody is struggling to find adequate transportation or something like that, that they can still get your services.
Definitely. Anything else? Okay. So you guys did mention a few of them. So the first thing that I have is person-centered approach, because even though there might be like a specific group of people that have the same disability, everybody is unique in what their needs are. So with every individual, we really want to take a person-centered approach to what their needs might be and how to accommodate their disability. Policies and procedures to accommodate disabilities. So most agencies should have policies and procedures for accommodating these individuals. Ensuring handicap accessibility. So this one, there's actually a law. It's Americans with Disabilities Act that's supposed to mandate public facilities to have make things handicap accessible. But not every building is ADA accessible. Unfortunately, the ADA, if it's not readily achievable for the building to become handicap accessible, they will make an exception. So they actually define readily achievable as easily accomplishable and able to be carried out without much difficulty or expense. So say, for example, you have a nonprofit agency that's in a really old building. If it's very costly for them to make handicap accessibility, or the architecture of the building is complicated and it makes it inconvenient for that agency, a lot of times they'll let it slide, which is very sad. Providing clear signage in large print. This is for individuals that might be visually impaired, just to make it so that, say they do come into like a waiting room, they can see a little easier. Avoiding labels and emotionally charged descriptors. So disability labels like victim of, or crippled with, or afflicted with, you don't want to use those. You want to instead say an individual with so-and-so disability. So how might nonverbal communication be essential to treating disabled individuals?
So I work with some teens who have developmental disabilities, and something that we have to be really mindful of in nonverbal communication is setting physical boundaries, because we're close with the group of teens, and see them a lot, and so when they get there, they want to give us hugs, that kind of thing. And so setting those kinds of boundaries between, okay, I'm a staff member, so that's not really our kind of that's not how we're going to interact, but I'll shake your hand or I'll give you a high five, something like that. It's interesting to have to set those boundaries and sometimes set them over and over again.
Yeah, and boundaries are so important too, even with working with any type of client. Do we have any other ideas? Shativia, I think you might be muted. I'm not sure.
Oh, no, I know. I'm trying to reread the question over and over. I'm still thinking.
Oh, no worries. You're okay. I can move on because we are going to be revisiting this topic anyways. So the importance of nonverbal communication when treating disabled individuals. So a lot of your ideas were really good. The biggest thing here is, especially since communication can be a barrier for serving this population, it's just very important that we're extra observant of their different, like, eye contact, body movements, and even like hand gestures that they might be giving you, because a lot of times we do have like universal hand gestures. Like, I know sometimes like this means okay, it's different things like that. So you just want to be a little extra observant when we're trying to provide care to this population. So this is where we want to follow up with the verbal and nonverbal communication behaviors. Earlier in the group, I had asked you to observe some of the communication behaviors that the group members have displayed. So what verbal and nonverbal communication behaviors did you observe today?
I've definitely seen a lot of head nodding and agreement. I love, that's a common nonverbal communicator. So
Yes, that's a huge one.
I think it was interesting that like Shativia was reading the slide, but you could see that even though you couldn't hear it, and so you thought she was, accidentally muted, but then she was like, "Oh no, I mean to be doing that."
Good, that's a good observation. Anything else? How do you think these behaviors could have been beneficial when we're providing services to disabled individuals?
I think nodding can be good feedback for a lot of people. So that is something that can be effective in a virtual setting.
Yeah, I do agree with that one. I think it's very universal, the head nods and the shakes, especially if like we're trying to communicate to somebody and we're kind of narrowing it down to a yes, is this what you need? Or no, is this not what you need type of a thing. Good job, guys. So our professor asked for us to end with a discussion on self-care this week. So I figured we could take a few minutes to just kind of talk about what we're doing for self-care, and if you guys feel like you need to change anything with your self-care routines.
all right. So for my self care routine, right now is very lackadaisical, very lazy. That's just how I relax. But I would like to be more productive during my downtime instead of, always just, in relax mode. So that's the change I'd like to make to my regimen.
Okay, yeah. Lazy time's good time. I do that too. Anyone else want to
Yeah,
share?
I think that having some lazy time is so necessary. I know, like, I totally understand that feeling of guilt for, oh my gosh, I should be productive right now. But if you don't take some of that time to be lazy, you won't be as productive during your productive time. So Like that's something I remind myself of sometimes.
Yeah. I know for me, I'm still kind of trying to navigate what works the best for me because sometimes I use like self-care strategies and then I exhaust them and they're not really working as well. And then I have to like recycle old ones and kind of do like, okay, sometimes I do a little of this and a little of that. But lately I have been walking so much. Like I think it relaxes me. So it's just a good way for me to kind of clear my head and, almost like match the anxious energy with like actual exercise.
I think that's a really effective way. If you don't mind me asking, do you track your steps or are you just walking?
So I do track my steps, but I forget sometimes to charge my Apple Watch. So sometimes it dies on me and then it doesn't track when I think it's tracking and
Right.
vice versa. But I usually try to get in at least like around like the 12,000 step mark.
Right. Oh, that's really good.
Does anyone
I've oh sorry. I've really been doing a lot of like crocheting, but I do want to kind of move more towards physical stuff, because I've kind of chillaxed lately on taking my dogs outside, and I can tell like they even are like, Mom, like we used to go outside and stuff, so that's what I've been trying to like kind of slowly integrate back into my schedule.
Oh, that sounds so nice. I want a dog so bad. I just can't have one because I'm not home enough, but I wish.
Honestly, if you were home enough, I have one, I have two, pick one.
Oh, yeah.
I'm kidding, I'm kidding.
I was gonna say, I'm like, oh, temptation. All right. Good job, guys. So next, this is kind of our ending. I just kind of wanted to do an open discussion. But for time's sake, I think we're just gonna do one each. So if you just want to pick one of these questions to answer and then just kind of, share your thoughts on it, I can go first. Um, I'm gonna do number 6 just because it's kind of a wonky one. Can you think of any movies or shows that included a person with a disability when the disability was not integral to the story? So I haven't seen like a ton of shows and movies because I don't have a lot of time to watch movies, but I was really thinking about this one as I was making this presentation. And I was like really thinking like, dang, I don't think I know any movies or shows where like some of the main characters or one of them has a disability that's, not an integral part of the story. I know sometimes we don't always know like what the main characters experience in their everyday lives unless you're like a huge actor nerd, which I'm not. So, but that's something that I thought was interesting to think about.
Now that you think about it, I'm trying to think of a movie or a show with the individual to just, even just if it was integral or not integral to the story. So, and I can't even think of any. The only thing that kind of comes to mind is maybe Fat Albert. And there were like, the communication issues with one of the cast members because he was like, they called him mush mouth, so there was, nobody can understand him, so that was one. And yeah, I can't think of any, so this is actually a really good question, gets me thinking.
Yeah. Who wants to go next?
So I guess I'll just go. I guess I already answered number 2, which was share a personal experience providing services to a disabled individual. Like I said earlier, the language hotline, which is an effective way, to communicate with individuals where they have language barriers. Oh, but you said disabled individuals. Physical or does it matter?
Well, it could be because disability is more than just like physical, so it doesn't really matter because I mean, having like a deficit in communication could also be considered.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
yeah, I would say that counts.
But that counts. Okay. So yeah, that's mine.
I can talk about number 3 a little bit. It's how might the experiences of people with visible disabilities differ from those of people with invisible disabilities. And I think about this a lot because I actually have an invisible disability. I have type 1 diabetes, and so certain things are really interesting experiences for me. One of those is going through airport security. That I really affects me the most. I don't look disabled, so when I tell the people going through airport security that I have to request a pat down, that I can't go through the normal machines because of the little machine parts that I wear on my body, they basically don't believe me unless, like, if I'm wearing something to cover these, they basically just don't believe me, and it's the whole process. I've had teachers in the past not believe me when I've had blood sugar issues. So having an invisible disability is really interesting because you're not always believed that you need the help that you need.
Yeah, I'm so sorry you experienced that. That sounds frustrating. And it also pours into the stigma part of what we think about when we think of a person with a disability. There's a lot of invisible disabilities that we don't consider, at the first, I guess, official meet when you see somebody. Like I have social anxiety, which, oh my gosh, like I'm just such an anxious person. Sometimes I really struggle with like social settings. So, I mean, that's something that people don't always consider.
So number 4, is one that really strikes me. I live, how we were talking about earlier, like rural communities, transportation is really hard. So luckily, like at my agency anyways, and NERCL, which works primarily with people with disabilities, there's a lot they can like enter, there's ramps or stuff like that, but the issue is there's not much transportation if they don't have it. So if they live, and you guys won't know because you're not from like Lewis County, but like for example Watson or something like this, and it's like a 15-30 minute drive to the nearest resource. If they don't have transportation, they can't really get to it. We did have a resource, but unfortunately the van that they would use, especially for like wheelchair individuals, broke down and they didn't have the funding to buy a new one. So I sit on a lot of boards through my work for various populations, and it just so happens disability tends to be one of them.
Yeah. It's very hard when you're providing services to rural communities that have deficits like that. And it's
Mhm.
it like saddens me when it becomes a budget thing because it's like you want to help these individuals, but we just don't have the funding.
Yeah, and a lot of Lewis County's programs are grant funded. So unfortunately, if you can't get the grant, you can't continue the service, even though everyone's aware of how desperately needed it is.
Yeah. And grants are frustrating because they do eventually run out. Good job, guys. So I just wanted to say thank you for coming to group today and participating. I look forward to seeing you guys next week, and you feel free to stay after to ask any questions if you have any. So thank you.
Thank you.